Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a great show for you today. We are actually going to be covering all four of the major American sports in today's episode. We're going to start off with football. We're going to talk a little bit about the wide receiver market, talk about some players that have been rumored to be traded, some updates on them, some places that these receivers might end up going if they are to be traded, and some other NFL news that is breaking as the show goes, because we tend to get some news while we're live. We'll follow that up with our fourth installment of the MLB offseason files, this time focusing on what a lot of people think, including me, had the best offseason in all of baseball, the Los Angeles Dodgers. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but it'll all make sense. And then the third segment, we're going to do a little bit more hockey coverage. The NHL trade deadline is coming up in just about a week from now. We're going to do a little preview on some names to look out for, some major players, teams, and what they might be looking for, and what I think they might trade. And then we'll close out our show with a little bit of NBA talk. We're going to talk about, there was an article put out by ESPN earlier today talking about the explosion of offense around the NBA really in the last 10 years. So we're going to talk about some trends. We're going to talk about what I think, talk about that article a little bit, how we can fix it. It was a really interesting article. We'll go over it. I highly recommend you read it. But yeah, we'll talk about all that stuff. But before we get too far into our show, just a reminder that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are by tuning in, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMCSportsNetwork./tip. You leave a tip or donation going to that link, leave a message with it. It'll scroll across the bottom of that screen. We will have a nice little conversation, you and me, talk about what you said. You want to contribute to the show. We really appreciate it. Again, that link to donate is streamelements.com/GSMCSportsNetwork./tip. We appreciate you guys for tuning in and for donating. But what do we say? We get right into our first segment, which, as I said, we're talking a little bit about massive wide receiver moves. There's been a lot of news, a lot of rumors, as there always is in the early stages of NFL at the NFL offseason when it comes to free agencies. And the wide receivers are always a group that gets a lot of attention. Not only because they're a very important position on the field, not only because of how much offense has evolved and how much the passing game matters, and you see bringing in these massive wide receivers can really transform an entire team's outlook on the season. But at the same time, because wide receivers are famously a diva-like position. So there's always a lot of news, always a lot of drama surrounding wide receivers. And it's one of those things that we love. We love it when wide receivers have their little moments. It's a fun thing to cover. But there's been a lot of rumors around a lot of the top receivers in the league this offseason already about them getting traded. Not always from them, a lot of times just from the outside, from just random rumors, and a lot of them have been shut down. We'll talk about all those, some people that might be on the move, and some possible landing spots. But let's start off with a couple players that were in the news for possibly moving, but have come out and said that they're not moving. Obviously, the big name out of that group, or there's a couple big names, but the name that I've been hearing the most is Devante Adams with the Raiders. The Raiders, obviously, are in a weird situation. They have cut their quarterback. They have Aiden O'Connell there, and they're not really in a position to compete for a championship. Obviously, they brought back the interim head coach in Antonio Pierce, former Giants linebacker, and the players love that. But they're kind of in that weird no man's land of sports, where you're not bad enough to compete for the first overall pick, but you're not really good enough to get anything done. You know, you might sneak into a wild card spot, but you're not really good enough to really threaten. They're in that, what I like to call the Steelers zone, Uh, you are a good team. You could be a good team. You're anywhere from you're just mediocre. This is the Steelers zone, at least in recent years, and that's where the Raiders find themselves. So they can do one of three things. And really, any NFL team can do this, but it really is more critical when you're in this zone of mediocrity, this kind of NFL purgatory that the Raiders are in. So they can do one of three things. They can stand pat, try to compete with the roster they have. I guess it's one of two things. And that's option number one. That seems to be the path that they're taking, and it's the path of least resistance, You're going to win games. Your fans aren't going to be miserable because you're going to be competitive in a lot of games, but you're not really going to push for a Super Bowl. And that's a fine place to be for some teams, that haven't had a lot of success. But if you have had a lot of success and you're back there, it's not the best place to be. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there is blowing it all up. And that is a really, really tough call to make for any front office. You never want to be the front office that blows it up because usually that means your job. A lot of times. Not always, but it takes a lot to survive a rebuild as a head coach, GM, and I know they just got new ones, but it takes a lot to survive a rebuild. So it's really, really risky to do that. And a lot of times it's the right move. In the Raiders' case, they're kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. Like, they don't have a lot of assets to make this massive move. Now, maybe something happens in the draft where they trade up, but they've come out and they said that they're not trading Devante Adams, which puts them back in that same spot that they were last year with Devante Adams and, an average to bad quarterback, depending on how you feel on Aiden O'Connell. I'm not so high on him. Maybe they go out and they get a veteran guy. Maybe they go out and they draft someone in the second round. They don't seem like a team that's going to draft a quarterback in the first round. The Raiders do. So they're probably going to get that second tier of quarterback. Michael Penix, I really like him. He's probably the top of that second tier. If the Raiders can get him, that might be a nice little fit. But by not moving off of Devante Adams, that's kind of the area that they're signaling in. On the same vein, the Minnesota Vikings have said that they're not moving off of Justin Jefferson. They are also in a similar spot where their quarterback situation is up for question, but the rest of that roster has a lot of really good pieces, has a lot of good stars, a lot of places it can go. Justin Jefferson, obviously, probably the best receiver in the league, but they are most likely not going to re-sign Kirk Cousins. Now, it's not off the question, but they also have a quarterback issue. They're also in that zone of mediocrity. And they're not moving off of him. They could get a haul for him. They're not moving off of him. Now, there's two different situations there. I'm more on the side of blowing it up on the Raiders than I am with the Vikings, because Justin Jefferson is a lot younger than Devante Adams, and I think you have more time to build around him. Devante Adams' contract is expiring soon for the Raiders. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have that number in front of me, but I know it's expiring soon, and it doesn't seem like a place with a lot of optimism. The Vikings, on the other end, they seem like a team with some more optimism around them. They seem closer to competing than the Raiders are. But, I could be very wrong about all of that. So that's the news for them. AJ Brown, there was some news around him asking for a trade. He personally has come out and said that he is not going to ask for a trade, and that's a good thing. The Eagles need him. They had a really down year in the down second half. They kind of collapsed. But keeping AJ Brown happy and keeping him there is going to be so important if they want to continue to be if they want to rebound after a tough offseason so far. I mean, they lost kind of a core member of them, Jason Kelce, as a leader in the locker room and on the field. Now they have Cam Jurgens to replace him, so it's not impossible. But if they were to lose A.J. Brown as well, that would really set them back a couple years. And I think they can bounce back from last season. They're still a very good, very talented team, but there's a lot of things that could go wrong with the Eagles. So holding on to A.J. Brown is a huge deal. And then the other big name that has been talked about for being traded all offseason, we touched on this a little bit, I think about a week and a half ago, Brandon Ayuk. He is in an interesting situation with the 49ers, and so are the 49ers with him, where he is not up for contract this season, but he is up for a contract next season. And he's asking for a lot of money. He had a nice breakout season this year. The 49ers don't have the cap space to pay him, and he could be really valuable on a lot of teams. There's a lot of people that are saying the Panthers should trade for him and make him the number one over there. He's a nice piece to have. He's young. He does a lot for the run game. That's one of the things that all those 49ers receivers do. They buy into the culture. They're really good, even if they aren't getting thrown the ball. They're good at they're really good teammates, making sure that the run is working so that they can get the ball because they trust in that culture and that offense. The Jets were rumored to trade for Devante Adams. Brandon Ayuk to the Jets again could provide a nice little piece next to Garrett Wilson for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. Because as good as he is, we saw what the Jets' offense was, and I know they didn't have a quarterback, but adding a piece like Brandon Ayuk for a little cheaper would be a nice piece. And obviously, there's two other teams. The Patriots don't have any weapons, but I don't think they're really in the market to trade for a wide receiver right now. If they were going to trade for a receiver, trading for Ayuk would signal them drafting a quarterback in the draft. If they don't, they're most likely going to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Or who knows, maybe they double dip on wide receiver and sign a free agent like a Kirk Cousins out there. But there's a lot of moves. And then the last major piece of wide receiver news that's been coming out so far. We talked about T. Higgins already getting franchise tagged. There was a report that came out yesterday, I believe, that said if the Bengals were to trade him, they were looking at a first-round pick in compensation from a lot of people. And getting that for a wide receiver in T. Higgins, who really could be a wide receiver one in almost any other offense in the league that isn't the Cincinnati Bengals, aside next to Jamar Chase, obviously. It really poses the question, if you were the Cincinnati GM, obviously you want to put your team in the best scenario to win. Does trading T. Higgins for a first-round pick make sense? Who are you going to get? It's probably going to be an end-of-the-first-round type pick for him. But does it make sense to move off of him for a first? I personally would not make that move, and it doesn't seem like the Bengals are really going to make that move either. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's a report that I heard. Obviously, it doesn't seem like he's going to get traded, but if you were in the shoes and you heard you could get a first-round pick, let's say it's a pick from anywhere from 20 to 32, back half of the first-round pick, would you do it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, in our next segment, we are going to transition away from football, move into a little bit of baseball continue our series on the offseason files, this time for the Los Angeles Dodgers and their massive offseason. Stick around. We'll be right back.